Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for being a few minutes late. Before I begin my opening and then going to the questions, I just want to acknowledge that today has been a pretty good day in terms of advancing good legislation for Native people everywhere, particularly our vulnerable women and children. With the ceremony that was at the White House today that you and I were able to be at with our staffs, I think it is a recognition of the good work from this committee that this tribal title was a significant part of VAWA, and I want to give public credit to your team led by Jennifer and to our team led by Amber and Lucy working on the VAWA side. It was significant and, again, worthy of celebration. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I said something similar, not as eloquently earlier, but I'll just note that in that room, the thing that caused the whole crowd to erupt and goosebumps up and down my spine and neck was when President Biden talked about the provisions that we all collectively authored. And I mean that in the most collective sense of this. This was a real accomplishment for Native people across the country, and you could feel it in that room. So thank you for your leadership as well.
No, good team partnership. Thank you. So this is a good hearing also. This is, again, just more opportunity to focus on some of the progress that has been made, looking at the state of Native economies, what we can do to support buying Native American. I think we recognize we've seen some good economic growth in the last few decades. I'm very proud, particularly in Alaska, of the progress that some of our tribal entrepreneurs and Alaska Native corporation leaders have made in growing not only Alaska's economy, but the American economy. In Alaska, 9 of the top 10 companies are ANCs, Alaska Native corporations. They have succeeded economically while still upholding Native values, which is absolutely key. But I think we know that this economic prosperity is not even across Indian country. There's still many barriers, and the opportunity for us to discuss what those barriers and figure out how we move beyond them is why we're here. But the barriers are everything from lack of access to capital, supporting infrastructure and markets. And in order to see continued economic improvements in Native communities, the role that we have here is to step up, work with Native businesses to break down the barriers. So I think this hearing is particularly timely given that the omnibus was just signed yesterday. The bipartisan infrastructure bill was just recently signed by the president. We had our Energy Act of 2020 that is now law. All of these are significant pieces in supporting sustainable tribal economic development and growing Native businesses. So we're looking forward to many of the advantages that we're going to be seeing from the infrastructure bill, whether it's the broadband, the water and wastewater. There's just so much there. But I think as we are learning, passing the law is the first step. It's the implementation and making sure that that American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian businesses and communities are treated as partners as we move forward is going to be important. So I'm glad that we have the administration witnesses with us today. I hope that you'll have an opportunity to hear from those who are part of this second panel, again, for their input. Just before I turn to my questions, just let me make a little bit of a comment about energy. According to the Energy Information Agency, rural residents and villages in Alaska pay exponentially higher rates for electricity, with some rates reaching over $1 a kilowatt hour, or about 800% higher than the national average. And I will just share with you that there's a great deal of concern right now in many, many, many of the villages around the state of Alaska. Their fuel supplies come twice a year. They come by barge, they come with a spring barge, and they come with a fall barge. And so the prices are set when that fuel is purchased at that point in the season. So right now, the villages haven't been impacted by the increasing price of fuel. It has with the cost of goods and airplane travel, but it hasn't translated to what they're paying when they go to get fuel for their snow machine, four-wheeler, and soon-to-be boats. But when that spring barge comes, they're locking in fuel at at the prices that we are seeing today, which we all know are just gut-wrenching. And so the prices that I'm speaking to, the rates that people are paying per kilowatt hour, you add on that the now higher price of fuel, and even if things should settle down, they're still locked in to that fuel until the next barge comes. So that's the reality of so many of the communities in rural Alaska. We do have some great news stories, though, and we're going to be able to hear from from Gary Hennig on the second panel out of King Cove. King Cove actually has had a good news day today because we got some good news out of the Ninth Circuit today, which is great. But Gary's going to talk to us about the community's hydroelectric projects that have enabled this primarily Aleut community to bring their energy costs down, to largely get off diesel. We're all looking for ways to, how do we reduce our emissions? How do we deal with climate change? Well, you got to get off diesel power generation first. So it's innovations and initiatives like the projects that we're seeing in King Cove that recognize the importance of valuing a local community's input in the planning and the administration of their natural resources. So I think King Cove serves as a great example to our federal witnesses of the important role that local input plays in decisions regarding involving natural resource management and enabling the communities to implement their own energy visions. So, Ms. Johns, let me just stick with you for just a moment here, since I'm talking about energy, and we've mentioned that we were able to amend the Energy Policy Act loan guarantee program as part of the omnibus to eliminate this barrier to its use, allow applicants to receive direct funding from the Federal Financing Bank and Treasury. This should hopefully open up capital, lower interest rates for energy projects. People are looking forward to that. But where there's a concern is, all right, you've got this big bureaucracy back here in Washington, D.C. You say you've removed these barriers. Can you tell me how or if your office works with DOE's loan programs to ensure that tribal producers that are interested in developing energy on their lands don't get lost in this kind of back and forth departmental shuffle?
Thank you for your question, Senator Murkowski. It's a great question because it's with LPO, our Loan Programs Office at Department of Energy. We work closely on coordinating efforts with tribes and doing outreach. Our office has a lot of connections with tribes, and I'm excited about this new language in the bill that will allow direct loans for tribes to apply for. And we have identified the barriers. We held a listening session last May, both LPO and our office, around some of the challenges that Indian tribes are facing, but also ANCs. And but we hope to, this could unlock a lot of
So
potential.
are you working with the DOE loan program
Yes.
as well? Okay, good. Let me turn to you, Ms. Sims-Hip, and I appreciate your comments about the food security initiatives. Couple questions for you. The 2018 Farm Bill extends 638 contracting authority under ISDIA to USDA through a couple demonstration projects. And the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium was selected as one of the participants for this pilot, which we think is great. The first thing that they did was to replace farm-raised catfish. We don't grow catfish. We don't raise catfish in Alaska. The catfish was flown to Alaska from across the country and placed as part of these food baskets, food packages, if you will. So the first thing they do is say, that's crazy. We've got some of the best fish here. So what they did is they replaced it with Alaskan halibut that's harvested and processed by Sunek Tribal Enterprise. Fabulous. Makes total sense. What doesn't make total sense is we're told that ANTHC is only authorized to supplant items within the food packages. So what they've said to us is if they have more authority to include in these food packages things that make sense from within the region They can select more goods from Alaskan goods from tribal vendors. So is this accurate that they don't have the flexibility to really make these food packages not only more local, support the local vendors, but also, for heaven's sakes, if we're worried about emissions, why are we flying catfish from somewhere in the South to people who have some of the finest wild sources of protein in the world? So can you tell me if we do have some flexibility, and if we don't, what more we can do to get it?
Well, I'm very happy that you brought that program up because it's I believe, one of the most important things that this committee was able to influence in the last Farm Bill. The 638 authority that was pushed into the Food and Nutrition Service with regard to the food distribution program that you mentioned has been able to actually put funding towards all of the projects that applied for the funding at the tribal level. All 8 were funded. And what we're seeing now is exactly what you pointed out. We're seeing the places where we can be informed by exactly the foods that are around the tribes that are actually using that program, and how it can inform the changes that we can make internally that would adjust.
Do you think you have the flexibility?
I believe that we have some flexibility, but I believe it to be a very complicated flexibility.
So would you just commit to work with
Yes.
us on this? We want to make it work, but it doesn't make sense if what we're trying to do is build about tribal empowerment here, help local economies deal with food security, and, oh, by the way, reduce our emissions. It seems to me that we just need to be communicating a little bit better, and I'd like to think that you'd be willing to work with us on that.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I know we've got limited time. I've got more questions, but let's turn back over to you, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair.